We're at the very top of the master building, and behind you is the river, and in front of you is the outside walling of the meditation room or temple or whatever one wants to call it, the chapel that Roerach had constructed for his private spiritual purposes.
So it's right on the other side of this wall.
Yeah, it's all this in here. And that's the very top.
The staggered layers at the top of the penthouse seem to bear some resemblance to one of Roerach's paintings titled Arhat. In Buddhism, Arhat is the highest level of enlightenment, said to be the ultimate goal of nirvana. In Roerach's painting, notice the image of the Buddhist figure sitting inside the staggered stones, perhaps a symbol for the enlightened esoteric elite in the meditation room. The master building rooftop is undoubtedly interesting, especially since it overlooks the Cathedral Church of St. John the Divine, the largest cathedral in the world, where many of the occult concepts of America all seem to come together. What's interesting is that much of the cathedral was being built during FDR's administration. On the outside there is a cross before what is called the Rose Window, an obvious symbol of Rosicrucianism. Inside the cathedral, we find praying saints alongside lurking demons. An image of what looks like a Zoroastrian Maitreya hangs upon a cross at the altar. Meanwhile, an upside-down cross is seen in one of the alcoves, serving as a monument to September 11th. Elsewhere, a phoenix bird is carved beneath the pulpit. A carving of George Washington is found next to that of William Shakespeare. And on the floor is the seal of St. Albans. St. Albans was one of the names given to Sir Francis Bacon. And in the midst of it, we find obvious imagery pertaining to the Holy Grail. Some more obvious than others, like this seal on the floor of the cathedral. But notice that there are two cups beneath the cross. Could this be suggestive of the two grail concept put forth by Wolfram von Eschenbach and others, who believe that the grail is both the cup of Christ and the stone of destiny? It is worth noting that Grail legends were of great importance during the time of FDR and the whole World War II generation. Not only in America, but in Europe, Richard Wagner based his famous opera, Parsifal, on the writings of Wolfram von Eschenbach. This opera would become a central focus for Adolf Hitler, and as a result, there are some who have argued that Hitler's whole life was dedicated to the Holy Grail. Occult historian Tracy Twyman writes of what Hitler and other occultists believed about the Grail, that it dates long before the time of Christ, all the way back to ancient Atlantis. She writes that just as Hermes possessed a magic stone, which has been associated with the Holy Grail, Hercules also possessed a heavenly stone and a special cup that he carried it in. According to Plato's dialogue, the Pillars of Hercules were the gateway to Atlantis. This may be why Sir Francis Bacon used these same pillars as a symbol for achieving greater knowledge. Oddly enough, about the same time the Masons were finishing the work on the master building, Nicolas Roerach finished this painting titled The Last of Atlantis. Which brings us back to the greater mystery of the Roerach building and what may be the secret key to understanding the dollar bill. But first, how did the Stone of Destiny come into the possession of Nicolas Roerach?
The receiving of this stone in the Rothenburg casket was very mysterious. Nobody's completely certain who sent it to him, but he and his wife Helena were in Paris in 1923 in an exquisite suite when all of a sudden this was delivered. And it was delivered in this box, and the box says 5 Place Vendôme, and that's 5 Vendôme Place, which was where they were staying, and it was sent from Bankers Trust, from MM, and it's addressed to Madame and Monsieur N. Roerach. And after many years, this is what has come of the Rothenburg casket that was in this pine wood box.
But why would this artifact have been delivered to Nicolas Roerach? And could it have really ended up inside the cornerstone of the master building, as Buff Perry and others believe?
When it was mysteriously delivered to Nicolas Roerach in 1923, he carries it around. He ends up going to India with it. By 1929, he's had this huge building, a 29-story Art Deco building built for him in New York City by Louis Horch, an investment banker, with a cornerstone prepared to have this sacred casket bearing the stone and other artifacts sent from India, because he's now taking it in 1923 from Paris to India, and placed in the cornerstone for posterity.
All of this might seem a bit too incredible, except for the fact that the laying of the cornerstone for the master building was a major event in 1929, attended by foreign dignitaries from around the world. From Spain, France, Poland, Australia, Romania, and a host of other countries. Why would they all turn out for this event?
This 1929 event is very important. Albert Einstein sent a tribute, which I have a copy of, to the construction of the building, to the meaning of Nicolas Roerach, who he was, what he was doing for humanity, and why the laying of this cornerstone was so important. Rabindranath Tagore, many luminaries and notables, government officials and the like, including Henry Wallace, who became FDR's vice president, first Secretary of Agriculture and then vice president in the next decade. And that becomes very intriguing, what all the connectedness is in terms of FDR, Freemasonry, and the stone.
Just as Freemasons were involved with the designing of the dollar bill, they were also involved in the construction of the master building. As noted earlier, the master building was financed by Louis Horch, who was appointed to a number of government offices during FDR's administration. In fact, he was placed in charge of the Department of Commerce by his fellow Freemason and Roerach disciple, Henry Wallace. As we have seen, Wallace, in his letters, shared a fascination with the Stone of Destiny.
And so the stone today is in this building?
The stone is in this casket, said to be in this casket. The reports I have received from the Roerach Museum would have that stone in this Rajput casket in the cornerstone of the master building.
The interest of men like Albert Einstein, Henry Wallace, and not to mention all the foreign dignitaries, becomes quite intriguing. when one considers the full contents of the casket that was said to be placed inside the cornerstone.
I'm familiar with the ingredients of the Rajput casket by having read letters from Zina Fosdick and her own notebook entries, and also because Aida Tolskaya herself, one of the co-curators of the Roerach Museum, wrote out what Zina Fosdick had stated they had placed in the Rajput casket in Darjeeling before it was delivered to the city of New York to be placed in the cornerstone.
As Buff Perry explained, the letter that describes the contents of the casket comes from Zina Fosdick, a longtime devoted disciple of Nicolas Roerach, who would later become the director of the Roerach Museum. The museum photo collection is filled with images of Fosdick alongside Roerach while they were in Darjeeling, India, where the casket was prepared. As such, it stands to reason that she would have known the details of what they put inside.
The letter's written by Zina Fosdick, and it was actually an entry in her diary. And what's written here is an accounting of all of the ingredients that are in the Rajput casket that was prepared in Darjeeling, India, in 1928 to be delivered to New York, to Manhattan, and to be placed in the cornerstone of the master building. There are a lot of interesting things that were placed in the Rajput casket. For example, an image of Maitreya printed on Tibetan paper.
As we showed earlier, in the occult belief, the Maitreya is said to be the last Messiah that will come.
The Maitreya is seen as the final deliverer and incarnation in the Buddhist tradition. Again, he's also Kalki in the Hindu tradition, the 10th incarnation of Vishnu. Vishnu is the great god of Hinduism. So they're not mixing up Jesus with Maitreya, but they are seeing Maitreya as a messianic figure, a world Messiah, who would answer all of the expectations of all the world religions at one time.
The reason Roerach would not mix up Jesus with Maitreya is because of the New Age belief that Maitreya is the true Christ, while Jesus was only his disciple. This is also the teaching of Scottish mystic Benjamin Creme.
Maitreya embodies what we call the Christ principle, the Christ consciousness. And 2,000 years ago, he overshadowed his disciple, Jesus. Jesus was not the Christ, except for 3 years. Over these 3 years, from the baptism to the crucifixion, Jesus was overshadowed by Maitreya. And when he spoke, sometimes it was Maitreya speaking, sometimes it was Jesus.
We featured Creme in our last documentary, Riddles in Stone. He is the founder of Share International and has been declaring for more than 30 years that Maitreya would be arriving soon.
Maitreya is standing by, ready to come into the world at any moment.
When we spoke with Creme in 2006, he had just come from speaking to the United Nations.
While I was in New York, I gave a talk at the United Nations, and there was a large group of New York theosophists. A certain number from outside the United Nations were allowed to come to the talk, and they were very responsive, very responsive.
These theosophists are modern members of the Theosophical Society, of which both Nicolas Roerach and Henry Wallace were members. Other famous members included Thomas Edison and Mahatma Gandhi. as well as Gandhi's close friend Jawaharlal Nehru, the first Prime Minister of India. Also pictured here, beside Nicolas Roerach. But in addition to the image of Maitreya, what were the rest of the contents buried inside the cornerstone of the master building?
A portrait of M.M. This, I believe, is Master Moriah.
Master Moriah was one of the names given to a spirit that is said to have inspired Madame H.P. Blavatsky. Roerach's wife, Helena, claimed that the same spirit was in contact with her and inspired her writings.
It's Master Moriah, who is actually Helena Roerach, channeling this entity, if I can put it that way.
One of her books was titled On Eastern Crossroads, in which she wrote extensively about the stone in her husband's possession, calling it the Serpent Stone, and saying, "The stone cometh, and it is a most grievous error to deny the stone." In fact, the quote from one of Henry Wallace's Guru letters about the new country that goes forth and the admonition to await the stone comes directly from this book.
Nicolas Roerach tended more to write about, sort of physical reality and the adventures in the Himalayan mountains, in the Altai region toward the Himalayan mountains, where his wife, Helena, wrote about the channeling and the esoterica, the theosophical kind of side of things.
While Roerach's writings may have dealt with reality, his paintings were anything but. Dedicated to universal archetypes, and with them, the promise of a sacred treasure. That brings us to the third, and perhaps most important item, placed inside the cornerstone of the master building.
They're all people who had varying kinds of relations with Nicolas Roerach. They were channelers, they were followers. But to me, personally, greatest interest is this side statement that Aida Tolskaya, who is also one of the curators of the Roerach Museum, wrote. Sina omits a piece of the stone that was placed in the casket. This goes back to that famous stone that the Roerachs became a cause célèbre because of, and many other people wrote about later. Everything changed once they received this. The 1924 marked a whole new direction for them all, and this came about, I think, this is 1924. You'll see the casket here is the same casket there.
And this is a burning casket of some kind.
Yeah, Chintamani. Chintamani is a Sanskrit term that means a stone of wisdom, that he calls the treasure of the world, and that's how he depicted the treasure of the world, the ultimate treasure of the world.
It seems only appropriate that this treasure hunt would take us back to Manly Hall's society in Los Angeles, and in particular to one of the graduates there from the University of Philosophical Research, a Freemason named Gavin Wentz. On his website, he quotes a curious passage from Eschenbach's Grail legend with a clear reference to the Knights Templar. The passage reads, "Wherever these Templars receive victory or defeat, I will tell you by what they live. They live with a stone. If you do not know it by name, I will name it for you. It is called Lapsit Exilis. The stone is also called the Grail." Eschenbach's reference to the Knights Templar is curious. During the same period that he wrote his Grail legend, the Templar Church of Garway, England was built. Inside we find mysterious symbols carved above what appears to be the outline of a man. These carvings are said to be a depiction of the Holy Grail, the chalice shown here. In the midst of it is a traditional Catholic host with a cross in the center. But inside the chalice, just beneath the host, is what appears to be a truncated pyramid. Which brings us back to Gavin Wince, who produced an award-winning documentary which he titled Lapis Exilis, based on a variant spelling of the Grail name given by von Eschenbach. This slight alteration to the original name had been recorded in the diary of Nicolas Roerach.
And it seems to be a contraction of several words in the Eschenbach example, but clearly in Roerach's example, Lapis Exilis means the exiled stone, or the wandering stone, or the stone that comes in from somewhere else.
The word lapis is simply Latin for the stone. But how was this stone envisioned by Roerach and his disciple Henry Wallace? Roerach described the stone as a type of moldavite, the meteoric stone of green or emerald color. This would seem to fit with the description given by von Eschenbach in the 12th century. On his website, dedicated to the stone's history, Freemason Gavin Wince came to this conclusion about just what Nicolas Roerach envisioned as Lapis Exilis, the stone they call the Grail. Is it really possible that Roerach, Wallace, and even FDR believed the Great Seal was a representation of the Holy Grail? And if so, then, as the treasure of the world, would this explain why the US dollar has been used from the time of FDR onward to send financial aid to nearly all the countries of the earth, for the establishment of a global society? During his 2008 presidential campaign, Barack Obama was criticized for wanting to spread the wealth. But in reality, the redistribution of wealth, a socialist tenet, is a practice that the United States has engaged in at a global level for more than half a century, beginning in the aftermath of World War II.
We want peace and prosperity for the world as a whole.
The United States now is conducting a new kind of foreign aid program. Aid not for destroyed industrial nations, but for developing countries with limited knowledge of modern technology. Many are just emerging from colonial status. American aid seeks to lay the foundations for industrial and agricultural growth. It is motivated by the humanitarian ideals of the American people and
But now that the economy of the American people has taken a turn, and it seems that the dollar is declining fast, how could this fit in to the plan of the secret societies? Consider that when the shock waves of the American stock market shook the world, France and China called for a global currency and a new world order. Which brings us to the other half of the dollar bill's design, the American eagle, that some believe represents the mythical phoenix, a bird that is said to destroy itself by fire. But according to Wolfram von Eschenbach, the power of the phoenix lies in the stone of destiny. In Parsifal, he writes, "By virtue of this stone, the phoenix is burned to ashes, in which she is reborn. Thus does the phoenix molt her feathers, after which she shines dazzling and bright, and as lovely as before." If these ideas are truly embraced by secret societies, could this suggest the intentional destruction of the American dollar, which will then force our financial networks into a global economy, resulting in a new Atlantean empire that extends to all the earth. As Buff Perry mentioned earlier, the stone is also called the Chintamani stone. As a symbol, the stone unites the occult traditions of both Eastern and Western mysticism. One thing is certain, those who practice the occult believe this artifact is the key to achieving the great work of all secret societies. Mark Amaru Pinkham is the co-director of a group called the International Order of Gnostic Templars. In his article titled Nicolas Roerach and the Chintamani Stone, a Holy Grail from Sirius, he writes that data regarding the Chintamani Stone maintains that it was brought to Earth by Syrian missionaries to eventually help precipitate a one-world civilization. He says there is some indication that one part of the stone has been the sacred stone of the Kaaba, which has united millions of Muslims around the globe. Pinkham goes on to write that it is known that a portion of the Chintamani stone was given to the League of Nations, whose stated goals were the creation of a one-world civilization. The association of the stone as a symbol of unity is an important part of how it is said to have come to America.
It has to do with the secret history of America and why that stone arrived here, who brought it.
Oddly enough, this mysterious artifact may provide the missing link to understanding how America has gone from being a Christian nation to a country beset with pagan statues, pagan monuments, and occult icons. For years, Buff Perry was financed by a leading member of the Philosophical Research Society to hunt down this stone of destiny.
I learned about this stone going into Roerach's hands through the director of the Rosicrucian Order, the curator of the Rosicrucian Museum in San Jose, California.
The whole concept of the stone as the Holy Grail represents the so-called perfecting of mankind. This is the theme of Rosicrucianism and Freemasonry. As Manly Hall writes, to the mystic, the stone is divine power, an ancient symbol of the perfected and regenerated man whose divine nature shines forth. After years of research, Buff Perry now believes the stone was brought to America by secret societies from Scotland in the years preceding the American Revolution. For them, the stone was to empower the foundation of a new republic.
Why is it called the foundation stone for America?
The foundation stone for America because it was brought here by the Jacobites who had been arrested at Preston in 1715 in their attempt to overthrow the kings.
The kings in question are the line of English kings who succeeded King James II, who was deposed from his throne in 1688 and succeeded by William of Orange. But the supporters of James rebelled against the deposing of their favored monarch. They were called Jacobites, a name derived from Jacobus, the Latin version of James. In short, the Jacobites were mostly Scottish Highlanders who were determined to restore James and the House of Stuart to the English throne. But the reason King James II was deposed presents a powerful clue as to why America has been steadily transformed into a cornucopia of pagan and occult philosophies.
King James had proclaimed that Jews and Presbyterians and Quakers and Catholics and even Ottomans should be embraced by the Church of England. That's why he was deposed. So the subsequent formation of this Jacobite revolutionary social order was in reaction to his deposition and in support of his embrace of Jews, Presbyterians, Quakers, Catholics, and Ottoman Muslims.
Since the Protestant English rejected James' ecumenical ideas and also feared that the hand of Rome was somehow involved, the Scottish Jacobites engaged in a series of rebellions against the new line of English kings. But their rebellions were ultimately crushed, and as a result, many of the Jacobite fugitives fled across the waters of the Atlantic to America.
In 1715, there was a rebellion in a place called Preston, northern England. Many of the Jacobites were arrested and deported or exiled to America. Standish family, Anson family, notable families in American history, pre-revolutionary history. Families that then went on to become part of the War of Independence, the American Revolution. Notable Masons and Freemasons.
These notable Freemasons were the survivors of the Jacobite resistance in Scotland, a land with a long history of secret societies, whose influence is both mysterious and extensive. Consider that centuries earlier, the Knights Templar fled persecution and are said to have hidden themselves within the Masonic lodges of Scotland. In the 19th century, Albert Pike would develop the ancient and accepted Scottish Rite of Freemasonry, which would become the most powerful arm of Masonry in America. Meanwhile, President Woodrow Wilson once said that every line of strength in American history is a line colored with Scottish blood. Perhaps the best example of the Jacobite influence in early America is found in Hugh Mercer, often called an unsung hero of the American Revolution. Mercer was a Jacobite doctor who supported the cause against England until their final defeat at the Battle of Culloden in 1746. He was then forced to flee to America, leaving his homeland behind. He served as Brigadier General in the Continental Army and was a close personal advisor to George Washington. It's even believed that it was Hugh Mercer who suggested that General Washington make his famous crossing of the Delaware River on Christmas of 1776. Incredibly, one of Hugh Mercer's children would marry into the Patton family and ultimately produce World War II hero General George S. Patton, whose blood and guts reputation was certainly in keeping with the Jacobite tradition. But in the years prior to the American Revolution, Hugh Mercer became a member of the Masonic Lodge in Fredericksburg, Virginia, the early members of which are said to be a who's who of Revolutionary War heroes. Mercer's fellow members included George Washington and James Monroe. At least 8 Masons from this lodge served as generals during the American Revolution, while 2 of them would go on to become American presidents. The Fredericksburg Lodge still exists today, and on its website states that it was chartered by the Grand Lodge of Scotland, July 21st, 1758. A history of the lodge says the following. The lodge was formed by men who had been made Masons earlier and elsewhere, Scotland most likely. There was in Fredericksburg in the 1750s a notable Scottish mercantile presence. Many of those early lodge members bore Scottish surnames, and it was to Scotland, not England, that the lodge later turned for a proper charter. Is it possible that the influence of the Scottish Jacobite rebels worked as an undercurrent that helped to inspire the American Revolution?
These families, they come under the general umbrella term Jacobite, were the real core population that led to ultimately to the War of Independence.
Consider that the 3 Jacobite uprisings are referred to as rebellions. During the Revolutionary Era, the motto, "Rebellion to Tyrants is Obedience to God," was adopted, a motto that Benjamin Franklin wanted to include on the design of the Great Seal. But rebellion against authority was not exactly the tradition of the Puritan Pilgrims who began the country. Their focus was on the biblical teaching of Jesus and the apostles. When Harvard University was founded in 1636, its motto was "Truth for Christ and the Church." Harvard's statement of purpose went on to say that the main end of life and studies is to know God and Jesus Christ, which is eternal life. But by the Revolutionary Era, references to God were more ambiguous, often referring to the guidance of divine providence. It has been noted that the revolutionary founders were not known for quoting the sayings of Jesus Christ. They certainly mentioned his name or made reference to Christianity. They said things like, "No king but King Jesus." But his teachings were absent from their writings. Sayings like, "Turn the other cheek," "Love your enemies," and "Bless them that curse you," had no place in a movement that was founded on rebellion. As a result, it becomes little surprise that once the new republic was founded, biblical imagery of Christ and the Gospels would be missing from the capital city. Instead, a celebration of pagan gods and goddesses would prevail, which seems to represent the ecumenical views of King James II and his Masonic Jacobite rebels. The chief Jacobite symbol was the white rose, traditionally worn on their Scottish bonnets. This dagger features a Jacobite rose with a pentagram in the center. Notice that the pentagram has a dot in the middle, which usually signifies the sun. The 5 points of the star symbolize the rotation of Venus around the sun, forming a pentagram over an 8-year cycle. This symbol was well known to the secret societies of Europe and is found carved throughout Washington, D.C. In light of these things, the question Americans today should ask is, if the idea of rebellion was in obedience to God, what God did they mean? Which brings us back to the Stone of Destiny, a mysterious artifact whose original owner has for centuries been acknowledged as the greatest rebel of all time. The belief is that the real stone was not captured by the English in 1296, but was somehow hidden away by the Scots. Buff Perry believes that centuries later, the Jacobites brought the stone with them to America.
To bring it over here was to, first of all, find refuge or sanctuary for it, but also to indicate this is where the Jacobite Revolution might really be successful. 1715, the first rebellion, 1745, the second, and then we have the 1770s with the Declaration of Independence. We have the Boston Tea Party, then we have the sort of prolonged war of independence, all brought about by these same people. So foundation stone, meaning this stone now is going to be placed here where the order will have its ultimate political fruition and success.
Well, this is Helena Roerach, a painting of her, I believe by Nicolas, and she's bearing the white rose, which came to mean what you swear an oath of secrecy in relation to. And the Jacobites would swear sub rosa with a single white rose. Her left hand, hand and elbow, are right alongside of the casket. The symbology is extremely interesting. You know, just the bearing of the white rose alone is, to me, highly suggestive of what she felt to be a secret mission that was associated with this stone that they received.
It seems clear that their secret mission had to do with creating a one-world order through the League of Nations and by supporting the New Deal, which both FDR and Henry Wallace believed was the new order of the ages. It was during FDR's administration that the National Archives building was completed, with the figure of what appears to be a perfected man carved upon it. The figure is called Destiny, with the word destiny used repeatedly by the key figures who influenced the dollar bill, FDR, Wallace, and Manly Hall. Is it possible that they all believed the Stone of Destiny had come to America through Nicolas Roerach? But exactly what destiny they had in mind for America and the world must give us pause when we consider the full history of the stone. According to an ancient legend, the stone that fell from heaven is a jewel that was cut from the crown of Lucifer himself. Commenting on this, Manly P. Hall writes that the lapis exilis, crown jewel of the archangel Lucifer, fell from heaven. Michael, archangel of the sun, at the head of the angelic hosts, swooped down upon Lucifer. During the conflict, Michael with his sword struck the flashing lapis exilis from the coronet of his adversary, and the green stone fell into the dark and immeasurable abyss. Hall goes on to say that out of Lucifer's radiant gem was fashioned the Sangreal, or Holy Grail, from which Christ is said to have drunk at the Last Supper. This idea seems to be captured in this depiction of the Grail by Dante Gabriel Rossetti. Rossetti was a 19th century esoteric painter who is said to have influenced modern Rosicrucianism. He may well have been familiar with the ancient legend, since his Grail cup appears to be a dark emerald green, mounted in a golden frame. But according to the various legends that are told, this stone of Lucifer was divided into different parts. One part became the Grail chalice, while King Solomon is said to have fashioned another part into a ring. Yet another part became the stone of the Kaaba. While this stone is black, Manly Hall suggests that Islam venerates the color green because of its association with the Grail stone. Others believe the Grail stone is the same as the Emerald Tablet. A depiction of this tablet can be found in the floor mosaic of the Cathedral of Siena, next to an image of Hermes Trismegistus, or Hermes Thrice Great. As such, it is known as the Emerald Tablet of Hermes. Written upon it is the Hermetic maxim, that which is below is like that which is above. The tablet is also called the Philosopher's Stone and is well known in the ancient world. Sir Isaac Newton even did his own transcription of the Emerald Tablet. In the modern world, Carl Jung is said to have had dreams of the Emerald Tablet. Manly Hall obviously knew about it and even published his own illustration. Hall writes that the oldest and most revered of all the alchemical formulae is the sacred emerald tablet of Hermes. In her book on the Merovingian mythos, occult author Tracy Twyman writes that the story of the Emerald Tablet of Hermes appears to be yet another incarnation of the Grail as stone. She goes on to say, the legend connected to these items and the stone they came from relate that the stone bounced off Cain's head as it fell to earth, leaving a scar on his forehead in the shape of a red serpent, the mark of Cain. This is what the Grail as stone represents. Meanwhile, Nicolas Roerach called his stone a Chintamani, an example of which is shown in this image of a Buddhist figure who holds a greenish Chintamani stone in his hand. While the legends of these stones vary and researchers often disagree, it is curious that both Roerach and Manly Hall use the same variant spelling of Eschenbach's term for the Grail stone.
Eschenbach wrote lapsit exilis rather than lapis exilis.
In each of their writings, both Roerach and Hall use the term lapis exilis. This might be written off as mere coincidence, if not for the fact that Hall was meeting with Roerach in the upper penthouse of the master building. This suggests that they had the same understanding of the stone. Furthermore, both men were involved, along with Henry Wallace, in the theosophical teachings of Madame H.P. Blavatsky, who openly asserted the ancient Gnostic belief that the true God is Lucifer. As such, for Roerach to have a piece of Lucifer's gemstone would have had great significance. Dr. Obadiah Harris explained to us the importance of Madame Blavatsky to Manly Hall and to his writings about the founding and destiny of America.
There's another important lady over here that Mr. Hall wanted to honor, and that is Helen Blavatsky, a Russian woman. By the way, her little house in Russia, and I understand now, is a national museum. But in the early days, he wanted to pay tribute to her contribution, and she was the co-founder of the Theosophical Society, whose headquarters now is in India. She wrote Isis Unveiled, The Secret Doctrine, and it is said, I don't know if this is true, but because she died in 1891. Manly Hall was born in 1901, but it is said that he had read The Secret Doctrine by the time he was 12 years old and understood it. So there's a feeling that Manly Hall had a bond with this woman, a kind of spiritual bond, and that when he wrote Secret Teachings of America, he was really writing the next book for her secret teaching, secret doctrine, that he was taking it farther, and he did. So he felt that in her was a kind of something of the isthmus of the spirit that gave birth to the Philosophical Research Society.
If what Dr. Harris says is true, then Hall founded his entire society on the Luciferian doctrines of Madame H.P. Blavatsky.
Well, Manly Hall, of course, really was one of the leaders of this whole world esoteric movement for probably 70 years or more. And he wrote extensively about the ancient mysteries, and he eventually joined the Masons, and of course moved up very rapidly to 33rd degree Mason, and then to the upper levels of Masonry, which are truly into the Luciferian, which most Masons have no idea even exist.
In his writings, Hall said that when the Mason learns the mystery of his craft, the seething energies of Lucifer are in his hands. This quote comes from the book The Lost Keys of Freemasonry that was first published in 1923, the same year the casket had been delivered to the Roerachs in Paris. The Luciferian Freemasonry, described by Hall, could very well have been known by such Masons as Henry Wallace and FDR, especially if FDR was so familiar with Hall that he sent emissaries to Hall's library. Also consider that FDR's successor, Harry Truman, a fellow Mason, had Hall's books on his shelves. And certainly, Manly Hall's view of Lapis Exilis as the gemstone of Lucifer would not likely have escaped the attention of Nicolas Roerach. Despite Roerach's international mystique and influence in the Oval Office, he eventually suffered a sudden and sharp decline. While searching for seeds and grasses for the Department of Agriculture, he was also heavily involved with the politics of Central Asia. Buff Perry believes that prior to his fall, Roerach was working to amalgamate the countries of Asia into a united Buddhist theocracy that would ultimately be joined to a one-world government.
In Nicolas Roerach's efforts to bring about an amalgamated, if you will, theocratic Buddhist nation that would have consisted of Manchuria, Mongolia, Tibet, part of China, perhaps part of India, perhaps some of Siberia, he was working with the Tashi Lama, who was suspected by China, particularly, and to this day very much suspected by China, as being subversive to the stability of the region. And as a result of this, Roerach became associated with accusations of espionage.
Perry's further suspicion is that, at least for a time, Roerach's political efforts were on behalf of FDR's New Deal administration. We recorded the following conversation with Perry in December of 2008.
So we've got what nobody's talking about right now in American media, the North American Union, right, through the Free Trade Agreement, the European Union, which is known about, but we never hear about it on the news.
Right.
And now there's this Asian Union. It seems like Roerach was being used by the American government to lay the foundation for or to bring about an Asian Union.
You've got it. That I accept wholeheartedly. And I think when you read it, the details, factual details, it's inescapable that America saw in Roerach the capability of creating this great Asian Union. And he was supported by American intelligence. Roerach was supported when he was trying to bring together that great new nation. Who was he reporting to? He was reporting to the American consulates in China.
The official story seems to be that once Roerach was accused of being a spy, he fell out of favor with his two greatest supporters, Henry Wallace and Louis Horch. But what about Roerach's so-called Stone of Destiny, this holy grail that he claimed was in his possession, supposedly buried inside the cornerstone of the Master Building? Whether the stone or some part of it is there or not, Buff Perry has come to the conclusion that Roerach's artifact was a cunningly devised fable.
Just for our audience, you don't buy into the idea of the mystical, magical nature of this stone.
Absolutely not.
And you think it was a showpiece fabricated by the Roerachs, really to beguile guys like Henry Wallace, it seems like.
Yes. I do. I do.
When we first interviewed Buff several years ago, he seemed to have the impression that the Stone of Destiny was the same stone that Roerach had in his possession. Today, he believes they are not at all the same thing, and that perhaps this is what caused Wallace to become disillusioned with his guru.
I think Wallace felt perhaps deceived when he's anticipating the arrival of what he called the Stone of Destiny in correspondence, and then ends up with, nothing in effect.
Nevertheless, Perry still believes that Jacob's pillow stone, which is said to be the real Stone of Destiny, was brought to America by the Jacobites and may have been recovered by the French-Canadian explorer La Vérendrye in the 1700s.
The La Vérendrye stone is, clearly has some association with the Stone of Destiny.
But the whereabouts of the stone today are still unknown. As a Jewish researcher, the real stone holds special significance for Buff Perry. According to the Jewish belief, the pillow stone of Jacob is one of the original artifacts that was kept in King Solomon's temple in Jerusalem.
The stone, variously called the Stone of Destiny, Foundation Stone, Pillow Stone of Jacob, and other titles, is expected and is necessary to be in Jerusalem for the final construction of the final temple. The Jews believe that that temple, and not all Jews, but most of the Jews today, active in rabbinical orders that are preparing to, conduct all the rituals in the final temple as we speak, believe that all articles that were in Solomon's temple have to be returned if they're known to exist. If they're not known to exist, then it's a different matter. But all those that are known to exist must be returned and would then go into use again in the final temple.
Buff believes that Nicolas and Helena Roerach aligned their Chintamani stone with the Stone of Destiny in order to sensationalize their own cause. But others continue to believe that Roerach's stone was from the stars and had real power. The Roerachs themselves were known for tapping into the supernatural realm.
The Roerachs were particularly eccentric.
Helena Roerach spent much of her lifetime channeling a spirit that called itself Master Mariah, the same spirit that inspired Madame Blavatsky to declare that Lucifer was God. We told you earlier about the letter from Zena Fosdick that describes the contents of the Rajput casket placed inside the cornerstone of the Master Building. But we neglected to mention a few of the items that Buff Perry talked about.
But there are all kinds of other ingredients. There are different fabrics and coins. And
what's the thing? Talk about the coins again.
Well, these are, in some cases, coins that materialized out of what would be considered occultation, out of the other world in different meetings and sessions that were held by the Roerachs. And I'm not saying this off the cuff or because I heard it from someone else. These are recorded memoirs of Helena and Nicolas Roerach.
And of course, many of the people who are into the New Age are into astral projection and in contact with these spirit beings, and there really are spirit beings out there. They refer to them as the Masters of Wisdom, or the Great White Brotherhood, or the Enlightened Ones, and they believe that they are guiding society. These are actually demonic forces and demonic beings, and of course they can materialize and disappear. The average individual says, oh, that can't be true. And yet it is true. And when you talk to the people who are dealing with this, they come in contact with this many times. They have accessed this other dimension, which is truly a demonic dimension. And of course, tragically, it's becoming increasingly apparent here in America as we turn our back on God, and we're not really a secular society. We've gone from being a Christian society to a secular society, and now a society dominated by the occult forces, of which are intent upon ruling the world.
If it's true that the Roerachs were in contact with the spirit realm, is it then possible that these same powers could have somehow influenced the design of the dollar bill? While the history surrounding FDR's administration is disturbing, there is said to be a darker level, and one that is openly satanic in the design of the dollar bill. These allegations begin with a group founded in Bavaria in 1776, known as the Illuminati. The order was founded by a man named Adam Weishaupt, with the alleged purpose of perfecting society.
The symbolism of the dollar bill, Adam Weishaupt, do you really think it has anything to do with the Illuminati, in your opinion?
Is the Illuminati to be defined as Freemasons and Rosicrucians and other secret society members? If that's the case, then yes, I believe the symbol on the dollar bill, the truncated pyramid, is directly related to the Illuminati, because Roerach was the Illuminati.
In the 18th century, the original order was thought to have a bloodthirsty agenda, and it was believed that they secretly worshiped Lucifer. George Washington warned about the Illuminati in his letters, while Thomas Jefferson and Benjamin Franklin were thought to be members of its inner circle. Which brings us to our next speaker. He claims to have been raised in a modern Illuminati family that dates back to the 1700s. He says that, as a child, he was made to practice black magic and witchcraft. His name is Doc Marquis.
My family goes back into the Illuminati all the way back to 1789.
Of course, we have no way of either confirming or denying Doc's claims, but it is worth noting that he has acted as an expert on the occult for law enforcement and the FBI. According to his publisher, in the past he has appeared on and consulted for Geraldo Rivera and Oprah Winfrey, and for shows like Hard Copy, Inside Edition, and Unsolved Mysteries. Doc has been a Christian since 1979, but he says that part of his upbringing in a family that worshiped Lucifer was to be taught about the secret Illuminati symbols of the dollar bill, and that understanding them begins with the Rothschild dynasty.
Meyer Amschel Rothschild had made a very interesting and profound statement. He said, "Allow me to control and issue the money of a nation, and I care not who writes its laws." And he was right.
Meyer Amschel Rothschild is called the founding father of international finance. In 2005, Forbes magazine ranked him 7th on their list of the 20 most influential businessmen of all time.
All this happened back in 1776, and this was during May 1st and shortly thereafter. The significance behind that is that on May 1st, 1776, Dr. Adam Weishaupt, who was a devout Jesuit priest, who was given the chair of the professorship of religious studies at Ingolstadt University, was approached by Meyer Amschel Bauer, who would later change his last name to Rothschild, along with 12 of his most financially influential friends. They knew Weishaupt at that particular time was not only a genius when it came to the occult world, but Weishaupt also had an axe to grind, because it was the Catholic Church that just recently defrocked him. He was no longer a Jesuit priest, and he was going to send a message to them, to the monarchies of Europe, and to all other people who would try to have their will over his.
What Rothschild and Weishaupt came up with was a plan to destroy the old world system of government through monarchies and the church, and to set up a new world order in its place. This is said to be the great plan of all the secret societies.
So what happened? Meyer Amschel Bauer approached Weishaupt and basically told him, "We know you've got the occult knowledge and genius to put it all together. We've got the money. You do it, we'll back it." Just to paraphrase what really happened. So in 1773, Weishaupt started creating what had never been created before. The idea of Illuminism had always been around, ever since the days of Babylon, with the co-founders of being that Nimrod and Semiramis. But no one had ever been able to actualize it. However, May 1st, 1776, the Order of the Illuminati had become a reality under the auspices of Dr. Adam Weishaupt. Now, like other nations, orders, countries and such, they have their two great seals. The Order of the Illuminati does. Those two seals can be found on the back of a $1 bill. People mistake those to be the two great seals of the United States of America. They are not. Those are the two seals of the Order of the Illuminati. And I'm going to explain it to you. In order to understand the seal itself, we have to first take a look at every single thing that composites it. We look at the first part of it on our left, which would be the truncated pyramid one. Above it is a 13-letter Latin expression that says Annuit Corruptus, and directly underneath the base of the pyramid is a 3-word Latin expression which is Novus Ordo Seclorum. If you were to look up the word, let's say, work, in the English dictionary, you're going to find at least 50 different meanings for it. It is the same thing in Latin. Different words have different meanings. They have more than one meaning. The word seclorum, one of the definitive meanings is secular. Something that is secular is of the world. So it is proper, very proper, to translate the bottom as New World Order, the Novus Ordo Seclorum. The whole of it is saying, announcing the birth of a new world order. This would be Dr. Adam Weishaupt himself, the very first head of the Order of the Illuminati. It was Weishaupt who had himself come up with a 7-part plan to create what he called the Novus Ordo Seclorum, or the New World Order. This is the person responsible for it. The interesting thing about the front of the dollar bill is that there are 4 huge ones. There is one in every single corner. Now if we look at every single one of them, they each have an oval around it, except for the top right-hand one. Now if we look at this blow-up version of it, you will find there's no oval. This is a shield that is surrounding the one. Now the reason there was a shield here is because this is very similar to the original shield that was given to the Rothschild family when Baron Meyer Amschel Rothschild had become knighted in England and received the lordship. If we look across the top of this shield, all the way to the left-hand side, it drops down and forms a crescent moon. It's a crescent moon because it represents the female goddess in the occult world. At the bottom of that shield, of that lunar moon, you will see the owl. And it's very obvious once you take a good look at that part of the crescent moon. And it is the same Illuminati owl that is being worshipped at the Bohemian Grove in California by those members of the Bohemian Grove, where presidents, premiers, kings and queens and heads of nations throughout this world have met. You can tell just by looking at this photo, that is a 40-foot owl. It is made out of oak, and that the worshippers are surrounding that fire pit around that altar, which is easily reflected in the lake around them. This is definitely the owl of the Illuminati.
The rituals performed at the Bohemian Grove are occult and idolatrous. One of them, called the cremation of care, is supposed to be a mock human sacrifice, though some suggest that real killings take place. When President Nixon was there, he commented about the extreme homosexual environment at this all-male boys' club. Among other powerful American leaders who have been spotted at the Grove are Ronald Reagan, Dwight Eisenhower, Jimmy Carter, Newt Gingrich, and George Bush Jr. and Sr.
Now, when we take a look at the O, it is actually, occultically speaking, the shape of the Ouroboros, the snake that's going around in a circle, devouring itself. This O is actually the eye in this lady's face that they want to look at. This is the O. Now, what's in the center of this O? You take a good look. It is the exact same owl of the Illuminati that we saw on the back of the $1 bill. So the question then becomes, who owns L'Oreal?
But the owl seems to be a major symbol for the secret societies, as they are found repeatedly inside government buildings in Washington, D.C. And a giant owl figure is even seen in the street design, with the United States Capitol in the midst of it.
Now the Druids from the Gaelic means, Druid means men of oak. These people worshipped creation among other things, but their sacred symbol was the owl, because the ancient god of magic and of the hunt was Pallas Athena. Her bird was the owl, and that owl represented wisdom. It always has.
Pallas Athena was also the goddess figure who was said to inspire Sir Francis Bacon. But now look at this owl seal at the Bohemian Grove, where it says, "Weaving spiders come not here." While the line is taken from Shakespeare's Midsummer Night's Dream, could this also be a veiled reference to what seems like a spiderweb design that forms the background of the dollar bill? Are there additional secrets hidden there?
Now, I'm sure you've heard of a Rorschach smear, or the Rorschach ink blot test, as created by Dr. Rorschach himself. You see the ink in the forefront and everything else is in the background. This way your subconscious mind is supposed to pick up on what's on the foreground, and you're supposed to be able to tell what you are subconsciously seeing. Notice how it's very busy. Lot of intersection diagonally lines. You can't make out what's there. But let's get rid of the background noise, get rid of all the diagonal lines that doesn't belong there, and let's reverse the principle of Rorschach and take what's in the background and bring it to the forefront and see what's there. Because once we do that, we find out it's quite obvious that there is another Illuminati owl, and that it is perched on something that looks like an arrow. That is what they don't want you to see. Once you see this owl here and compare it to the other one on the left-hand side of it, it becomes very obvious that this is an owl. You can now begin to distinguish beyond all that busy signals and such that they don't want you to look through. Yet, they place there in honor of their totem bird, the Owl of Wisdom, which is the totem bird because their god, Lucifer, was supposed to have been the wisest of all of God's creation. Wisdom of Lucifer, wisdom into the bird, wisdom into the word Illuminati. Therefore, the chain of wisdom is followed all the way through.
All right, now, did they teach you this in the Illuminati?
Yes. Well, I want you to understand that the first symbol is known as a pentalpha, from the Greek word for five, pente. It is a five-pointed star. Now, this next one is a pentacle. Now, it looks similar, but I want you to notice how it is interwoven. It runs through and in between itself. Now this next symbol is what's known as the Star of David, the Mogan David, the Jewish Star, the Seal of Solomon. There's numbers for it. This is the symbol for the nation of Israel. Now, when you take a look at it very carefully, you will notice that it is two equilateral triangles that are interwoven. This shows the union of God with man. However, when you look at the next one, it's similar to it. It's known as a hexagon. This is when you take two equilateral triangles, place one on top of another. Symbolically speaking, you're placing man above God. Now, this next symbol is the foulest, the most evil of all symbols in the occult world. There is nothing that can even come close. It is known as the hexagram. It is the six-pointed star with a circle surrounding it. It is this symbol that must be used during high ceremonial magic or high ceremonial witchcraft when you are summoning up demons to this plane of existence.
The use of the hexagram is said by Doc to be very symbolic and seems to represent the occult concept of a Christ figure, just as the Maitreya was for Nicolas Roerach and Henry Wallace. But what Christ do they mean? Doc believes the pattern of hexagrams in the design of the dollar bill provides the clue.
If we take a look at the 13 stars directly above the head of the eagle and connect the dots, you will see where the very first hexagram is located. And if you notice that surrounding the hexagram is the 28 guidelines that make a circle. Now, inside every single point, the 6 points, is a star. There are 6 of them. They surround now the 7 stars. Remember, 6 is the number of man, 7 is the number of God. Now, it is man that is surrounding God or is placed above God.
If what Doc is saying is true, this could represent the person the Bible calls the man of sin, who opposes and exalts himself above all that is called God or that is worshipped. Doc's interpretation seems to also fit the worship of Lucifer, for in the Bible, Lucifer declares that he will exalt his throne above the stars of God. Next, Doc claims a second hexagram can be found by connecting the various points where the much talked about number 13 is represented.
And don't try to tell me it's the 13 colonies.
There are 13 stars above the eagle's head, 13 stripes in the shield, 13 leaves on the olive branch, 13 arrows in the eagle's talon, and then 13 letters in the phrase E pluribus unum, which makes for 2 points on either side of the eagle's head, for the 6 points total of the hexagram.
If we take a close look at the same seal and connect all the 13s together, just like we did when we were kids, when we were playing that game, connect the dots. Once we connect all the 13s, it becomes very apparent where the second hexagram can be found. In this one, which is very obvious, already comes with a circle around it.
So this is the second hexagram here in figure 2.
Yes.
And then where's the third hexagram?
The third hexagram can be found on the other part of the Great Seal. Again, connect all the 13 together, the 13 letters, the 13 steps in the pyramid, connect all this together. And you'll note with the circle that's already there, it forms the third hexagram. In other words, a 6, and a 6. A 6, 6, 6.
Doc has deciphered a code that, if there, would glorify Lucifer's Messiah, whom the Bible calls the beast or Antichrist. In the book of Revelation, it reads, "Here is wisdom. Let him that hath understanding count the number of the beast, for it is the number of a man, and his number is 666." Could there really be 3 6-pointed hexagrams on the dollar bill?
Once we start at the base of the pyramid, which is the foundation of all things, and follow the design of the hexagram itself, you're going to find out something very startling. We go from the M and follow the symbol all the way up to the A. The A cuts directly underneath the Eye of Lucifer all the way to the S. The S connects all the way down. It goes in between the V and the I and connects all the way to the O. And following the symbol, the O connects up and over along the symbol of the hexagram to the word N. In perfect sequence, it's M-A-S-O-N, Mason. It's not what a lot of other people have espoused, that the symbol connects down to the M in seclorum and that the word is an anagram or something like that. Those people who are doing that obviously don't know what they're talking about, or they don't know how to plagiarize me correctly. Because the order of the Illuminati have stated and always will state, this is perfectly spelled out to be M-A-S-O-N, Mason. This points conclusively that the Masons have been involved in the order of the Illuminati. This was back during the Council of Wilhelmsbad, which would have been July 16, 1782.
All right, so what are we seeing?
Now, if we look at the bottom one of the reverse side of the dollar bill, you'll see on the right-hand side that, again, there's a lot of busy intersecting diagonal lines. Yet, if we apply the same principle we just used to reveal the hidden owls of the Illuminati and apply it, you'll find that there is now a skull-faced winged demon. And it is very obvious, once you take away the background, the busy noise, it becomes very apparent what it is and that it's been there all along. And if we just simply go and enlarge that section, just start with a small one and just keep enlarging it and enlarge it even more, even with the background noise there, as I call it, I think it becomes very apparent what we are now looking at, that it is still a skull-faced winged demon. And it is these demons that are protecting and blessing the 2 great seals of the Order of the Illuminati. And it would make perfect sense that it had to be demons used to protect these seals, since I am convinced it was those same demons that handed them over to Thomas Jefferson when they first created them. I am convinced, beyond all doubt, that that indeed was a demon sent up from the bowels of hell, probably under the direct orders of Lucifer himself.
Doc Marquis makes it clear that he is no longer involved in the occult, and that since becoming a Christian, he has dedicated himself to warning others about the activities of the secret societies that worship Lucifer.
I've been doing this now since the late 70s, when I first left the Order of the Illuminati, and that's when at that point I had become a born-again Christian. At that time, I realized what I had been doing all along. Maybe in my own way of trying to make up for what I had done, and I've done a lot of heinous things in this life, I begin to wonder if I'm not trying to make up or atone for some of those things I had done. And I know in my heart of hearts that as a born-again child of the King, my sins have already been bought and paid for. But still, there's just that part of me that still feels so guilty about everything I've done. So it could be in my own way, and I'm somewhat convinced that in my own way, I'm still trying to make up for all those crimes I was guilty of when I was in the Illuminati.
Doc makes it clear that he believes demonic forces were behind the design of the dollar bill and are working through secret societies. One of them is the Order of the Eastern Star, the female chapter of Freemasonry, whose icon is an inverted pentagram, a symbol associated with the satanic goat of Mendes. Ed Decker told us a story about a woman he once counseled who was involved in this society.
I got a call one day after I had published a book on it, and a little book called The Question of Freemasonry. And in that book, I had, on one page, is the actual goat of Mendes.
The goat of Mendes is a very significant symbol, since it was designed by 19th century French magician Eliphas Levi, without question the most influential occultist of the last 200 years. In his books, Levi glorified Lucifer and Satan, and his writings were quoted extensively by every major occult leader, including Albert Pike, Madame H.P. Blavatsky, and Manly P. Hall. Now listen carefully to Ed Decker's story.
I got a call from someplace back in Pennsylvania, New Jersey, and this is years ago. And a lady called me up and she said, "I want to talk to you." She said, "I received a copy of your book. I am the head of the Eastern Star for my state." And she said, "Every time I go to another area of the state to do the induction of the leadership of the local chapters of the Eastern Star, I have these bad dreams, and it's like this demon comes in and attacks me in my bedroom, and it's this evil, evil thing. And it's beginning to bother me." And someone mentioned to me that, you know, the Masons and the stuff that they do isn't really godly. You might want to study it a little bit. She said, so she told me that she went to a Christian bookstore and asked them if they had anything on the Eastern Star or Freemasonry. And the lady said, "You know, in the mail, I had just gotten this booklet. It's called The Question of Freemasonry by this guy, Ed Decker." And she said, "I opened the book, I opened it up to the page, it just opened to the page that you have the goat of Mendes on there, and I looked at that, and that's the demon that's been coming into my room and attacking me when I'm going around the state and doing the inductions of the ladies of the Eastern Star." She said, "I ran down 3 blocks to my husband's office, left my car right in the parking lot of the Christian bookstore, ran down there, got my husband out of his, I think he was an insurance agent or something, and said, 'Look at this.' They left there, went home, read the book, got on their knees, confessed it as sin, renounced it, and had that thing taken off their back. And from that time on, all that heaviness left her. When it went away, it just moved off her entire spirit. It was a spirit of darkness and evil. And it was the goat of Mendes, the same thing that's on the Medal of Honor, the same thing that's built into the Capitol and the Mall and the White House, built in there. It's the same evil spirit.